morning, Dan and Amy. Well, crystal stemware for all my aids,
What?
said Queen Hillary. Hillary Clinton's State Department spent millions of taxpayer dollars on lavish goods, such as a $5.4 million no-bid contract for crystal stemware, $630,000 to increase Facebook likes for 4 State Department pages.
Wait, how much did they spend to increase their profile on Facebook?
$630,000.
630 grand?
Yeah, it's a 21-page memo that was prepared by the RNC that documents some of Hillary's more colorful and garish expenditures during her time as Secretary of State. A time she points to as evidence of her great record of public service the last 30 years when that issue was raised. Also, reconstruction projects in Iraq and Afghanistan that didn't go terribly well. That was $600 million. $3.6 million fleet of unused broadcast TV trucks in Afghanistan, $167 million on cost overruns while expanding the embassy in Kabul. 79, and then, just more frivolity, $79,000 in taxpayer funds at the State Department to buy up copies of President Obama's book.
Oh, really? To increase sales? What did they have a big book burning session afterwards? I mean, what do you do with all the books?
Well, isn't that even though it's a relatively small amount of money, not for book sales, but relatively small amount of money for the State Department? I mean, that's a way to funnel royalty money to the president. $53,000 on marble polishing services at the U.S. Embassy in Brasilia. Oh. So now you're starting to get a sense of where that $6 billion that had gone missing while she was at the helm of the State Department ended up. Just interesting. That just all in the kind of context of the ruling class and Clinton Inc. and living large on other people's money, whether it's via the foundation or directly via taxpayers. It's fascinating stuff, and there's more there, and we should pour over it with our friend Ed Henry, Fox News chief national correspondent, who's had the unenviable job of being embedded with the Hillary Clinton campaign for most of the general election. Ed, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to talk to you. How are you?
Good. So I mentioned some of the State Department expenditures in this RNC document that was prepared. That does not look, doesn't really position Hillary very well optically in a time of relative austerity for millions of Americans, does it?
Sure. Well, I mean, look, I think in fairness, some of those projects are not all her fault. I mean, when you talk about reconstruction in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm sure we can go back to the Bush administration, and there was a lot of money wasted. And,
no question.
Other money well spent. But your point is well taken about, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to improve likes on Facebook or buy up President Obama's book. I mean, what in the world was happening at the State Department when, meanwhile, our policy in Libya, Syria, let's just take a little spin around the globe. And I think the bigger point from what he just said that I certainly take is if you think back to the first 3 debates, and the Hillary Clinton camp certainly thinks they did well, and Donald Trump has been pushing back on that. But I did not hear Hillary Clinton spending a lot of time focused on a really strong record at the State Department. She barely talked about being Secretary of State, only when pressed by a moderator or by Donald Trump, and then would say, well, I went to 112 countries and this and that. But she can never really list what she accomplished as Secretary of State, and some of what you just read might point us as to why.
Well, can you name something that she accomplished as Secretary of State?
Yeah, no, thankfully I didn't actually work for her, so I don't have to explain. But you're right. It's a hard one to point to. I mean, I think big picture, what does any Secretary of State accomplish? I think John Kerry, if you had him on right now, would say, the Iran nuclear deal would be at the top of his list. And then I think you would immediately ask him, since you're both very astute and good at questioning, what in the world, how is that accomplishment?
Right.
The Iran nuclear deal looks complicated, to say the least, and far from over. So, look, all secretaries of state, put out big ideas, fly around the world, and often come back home empty-handed. And I think, in fairness to Hillary Clinton, in this case, she was executing the policy of President Obama. In the case of Syria, for example, she had been a bit more hawkish while President Obama was doing virtually nothing. Maybe she should have pushed harder. Maybe this is a sign of her lack of influence inside the Obama administration. But some of the things she did push for in her defense, President Obama either didn't listen to her or just went another way. So I do think that, for somebody who's running on experience in large part and a resume, her time as Secretary of State is not something that has turned out to be very good. There's not a lot of accomplishments to tout. And then let's talk about the Clinton Foundation. Let's talk about the email server that happened while she was Secretary of State. Her time at Foggy Bottom turned out to be a pretty dark chapter for her.
Well, and there's a new wrinkle in the Terry McAuliffe saga, too, as it pertains to the FBI criminal investigation into some of her conduct at Secretary of State. McAuliffe gives $500,000, round numbers, to the wife of one of the now deputy directors of the FBI, who had some oversight responsibility at FBI over the Clinton Foundation criminal investigation, or the Hillary Clinton criminal investigation, excuse me.
Yeah.
And now we find out that Hillary Clinton headlined a fundraiser for the PAC that steered that $500,000 to the wife of the deputy director of the FBI. And we're supposed to believe that because the deputy director didn't participate in his wife's campaign, there's nothing to see here.
Well, okay, there's about 5 or 6 things I want to react to because I think you're putting a lot of important issues on the table. I mean, let's start with the FBI. What in the world happened with James Comey? I mean, at the beginning of the investigation, Democrats and Republicans were saying this is a paragon of virtue and somebody who's independent. And I think the fundraising activity you just mentioned, just the way he handled the investigation, the news conference he had where he basically said all these horrible things happened, all these statements Hillary Clinton made about the server turned out to not be true, and then said, we're not going to do anything. Right. And now, FBI agents apparently who are not happy with that decision appear to be spilling out various documents and information that really put a cloud over James Comey and the FBI. Let's start there. Number two, Terry McAuliffe raising money for the wife of this FBI official, while Hillary Clinton is under investigation is bad enough. Then look at the fact that Terry McAuliffe himself is currently under FBI investigation for a separate matter.
Right.
So what in the world was happening there with the governor of Virginia? And in terms of Hillary Clinton appearing at a fundraiser for that PAC that he was running or helping, Hillary Clinton and Terry McAuliffe and Bill Clinton are very tight. And so in a new Clinton administration, if that happens in a couple of months, and she comes to power at the end of January, Terry McAuliffe's going to have a big role, whether he's in the cabinet or he's just an outside advisor. And so these are the kind of issues people should be paying attention to. And the other thing I'd make real quickly is, McAuliffe has been very big with, Doug Bann, the former Clinton intimate, and President Clinton in terms of, all this stuff was going on, and you called Bill Clinton Inc. I mean, this memo that came out in this WikiLeaks dump, there's a lot in there, but one of them, this memo saying Bill Clinton's enriched himself to the tune of tens of millions of dollars from Clinton Foundation donors. You're giving money to a charity, and then you're getting hit up by the former president and his people to, pay him for speeches, pay for consulting. Look, it's a free market. I suppose, if you want to make money, you can make money. But when the Clintons go around, this goes back to what I said about the debates where Hillary Clinton said, the Clinton Foundation does all this great work around the world. Maybe so. But then why do you have to be putting money in your own pocket at the end of that? Why is it not just about charity?
Yeah, it's so sad. I mean, Clinton Foundation is going to be shut down if she becomes president, right?
No.
Or are they going to break it off?
I mean, they said they'll stop fundraising. So they would stop fundraising Bill and Hillary Clinton, but the foundation could go on Chelsea Clinton or someone else. But you're right, to raise that, maybe it will be shut down because of public pressure.
Yeah, I mean, they've said in limited areas, too. Not just that it won't shut down, but the fundraising will be suspended in limited areas, not the other great work they do.
Well, like with foreign governments, for example.
Yes, right.
Stop that.
Well, it sounds fraudulent.
Well, so take a 30,000-foot view with 10 days to go here. You've got headlines like Kim Strassel's piece in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, Grifters in Chief. You've got the WikiLeaks memos, this Doug Bann memo that you just mentioned that has been the topic of conversation. So combine all of the Clinton Foundation, Clinton corruption, hanky stuff around Clinton Inc. going on with the news about Obamacare premiums, with kind of the Michael Moore diagnosis of the Trump movement. This is not the conversation Clinton wants to have to close the show, is it?
No, it's not. And I think, look, in terms of the allegations against Bill and Hillary Clinton, personally, I believe as a reporter that's baked into the cake. People have known about some of this. Sure. Is more detail coming out? Yes. Is that going to tilt the election? I don't think so, because I think it's been baked into the cake that people largely do not find Hillary Clinton honest and trustworthy. So what does that mean? Well, number one, I think the Obamacare stuff you're mentioning is big. Let's see what Donald Trump does with it. Let's see if he can actually make a case in these final days that what both Hillary Clinton and President Obama have been selling us about his legacy, while by the way, President Obama and Michelle Obama are out there campaigning and saying, things are great with the economy right now and people still don't really feel a recovery. They're saying that Obamacare is wonderful when, in fact, the premiums are skyrocketing. My point is, yes, there's a lot of problems with Hillary Clinton and her campaign, but it's up to Donald Trump in his final days to make his case as to why he would do a better job and really weave together. And I think he tried in Gettysburg with that sort of contract with America. It's kind of late. But the idea, okay, well, then what will you do differently? And I think the Obamacare thing gives him a dramatic opportunity here to try to weave together what he would do, whether he would repeal Obamacare, what would he replace it with, what would he do better on jobs. My point being, all these allegations of corruption, that alone is not going to win the election for Donald Trump. He's got to weave together a positive message.
So, the reporting is the polls have tightened nationally and in a lot of the battleground states. But then you've also got the Charlie Cooks and other political observers who say this thing is over, it is done. What's your sense of it from the sense you get from the Clinton camp?
My sense is Hillary Clinton clearly has a solid lead, but solid is not insurmountable. I think I've watched the Fox poll from a couple of days ago that suggested, we had it at 6-7 points nationally, and it was down to about 3 points nationally. I think that's closer to reality. That's good news for Donald Trump in the sense that I don't think it's over, but I think it's bad news for Donald Trump in the sense that since the conventions, and especially since the first debate and the way the race turned around that time with the Miss Universe stuff and other things, Hillary Clinton has maintained a lead, whether it's 3 points, 5 points, 8 points. She's still winning. It's not insurmountable. But again, I think just throwing out, allegations of corruption, I think that's maybe helped heighten this race because I think you're right. I'm seeing movement not just in the national polls like Fox, but there are battlegrounds that appear to be slipping away from Donald Trump, whether it be in North Carolina or Florida, that are tightening in all kinds of polls and are suggesting they're back to being dead heat. I think that's really bad news for Hillary Clinton. I mean, Donald Trump has had about the worst 3 or 4 weeks maybe any candidate has had in American political history in terms of the allegations and, self-inflicted wounds. And you add it all up. He's had a brutal 3, 4, 5 weeks, and yet the polls have tightened. Instead of Hillary Clinton going to 10, 12, 14 points, it's tightened. Does that mean he's going to win? No, but it means that she has not put him away. Again, I put it in his lap. He has to weave together, finally, a more positive, hopeful, optimistic, forward-looking message in the final days. Otherwise, if it's just like she's crooked Hillary, he's made that case, and that's kept this race close. What will you do as president? What will you do as commander-in-chief? When you and I, all three of us went around the world with Syria and Libya and what she did as Secretary of State, what would he do better as commander-in-chief? What would he do better on top? All of these things are there for the picking, and I think it's in his lap now to actually make that case.
Well, Trump is like Steven Seagal. He's hard to kill. Ed Henry, Fox News Chief National Correspondent. Ed, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer live.